Welcome to the 63rd episode of the Hail Mary podcast. I'm A. Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to preview the American Conference opener against Temple. Let's get started. Before we get into talking about Temple, let's talk about a couple of changes we saw on the depth chart this week.
Okay.
Nothing really significant, but on the offensive line, all of the starters are the same, but Payne Hebert, Ben Rios are back on the lineup as, twos or oars. And then Daniel Ogundapi is not on the two deep. We saw a tweet from him a couple of days ago where he had praying hands, so I'm not sure if that means he's maybe injured or something else is going on there. What are your thoughts on the O-line changes?
Well, I don't really remember what these guys were injured with to begin with, but if they're lower body injuries, they could just be placed on the roster or the depth chart just so kind of throw Stan Drayton and his staff off a little bit. One thing to think about is we are expecting some sloppy conditions at Lincoln Financial Field on Saturday. Mm-hmm. So slippery conditions, lower body, even with Frank Harris, you're kind of wondering, should he even play because of that?
Yeah.
We'll see what happens there too, but it would be especially difficult for these offensive linemen because of the fact that they're big dudes, and you just don't want them having some lingering or lower body injuries.
The other thing is that there are 4 tight ends listed for the first time on the depth chart. Patrick Overmar has been added. Still no Dishman, but I think it's interesting to see that there's actually 4 tight ends listed. I wonder if maybe that's just them trying to add some additional depth for blocking because of the O-line injuries, or do you think we're going to see some more 12 personnel with them being involved in the receiving game?
No, I'm with you. I think it's absolutely them trying to say, we're going to have Ben Rios and Payne Hebert on the depth chart, but we're going to play maybe Patrick Overmar and some of these tight ends to help supplement, our offensive line. So, obviously they love to go out of 12 personnel, but I still want to believe that it's just to help out this offensive line, just to maybe get it out to the receivers, maybe and hopefully some quicker passes. We'll get to that, though.
Yeah, and speaking of the receivers, Chris Carpenter is back on the lineup. He didn't play in Tennessee. And not exactly sure what his injury was after Army, but good to see that he is back on the lineup. A couple of interesting moves. Amador's been moved to slot and McEwen to flank. What do you make of those changes?
It feels like they're getting to their actual natural positions, right? It feels like it's taken, we're in game 5 now, for the staff to finally figure out, we need to have, David Amador in the slot position to kind of, getting him in there against either a safety or maybe even lined up against a linebacker and have a mismatch there. Something to build his confidence, as well as, giving maybe a better target for, our quarterbacks to throw to. And then, with Devin McEwen, he's a fast guy. And, the bottom line is you're going to want him one-on-one on the outside with somebody. Mm-hmm. And whether it's just the threat of him out there or whether he actually, makes some big plays, the threat permeates throughout the offense and it kind of helps open things up. So, all it takes is him to make one big catch down the sideline or even across the middle, on a deep post, and we're good to go. So it's good to see his speed, getting used in the right spot.
Yeah, another notable person who is not on the depth chart is Pig Cage. Not exactly sure why, so I'm not sure if there's an injury or something more. We're going to learn about that, but certainly hadn't seen anything in his play that would make me think that he had gotten replaced.
If you look at the PFF scores, they're low. So sure, maybe you're trying to get some other guys in there. But you're right. I guess there's been so many problems that it's been hard to say, Pig Cage is a huge problem, at his position. So, yeah, it's a bit of a surprise, but, sometimes that's just what you do again. You brought in, we talked about the offensive line of how we're showing Ben Rios and Payne Hebert. Maybe we're not showing Pig Cage. Maybe he will still show up and play. We'll see on Saturday.
Yeah, of course, JT and Frank are still game time decisions, so I'm not sure exactly who's going to be starting there. I'd imagine we'll probably see Tyke start with maybe JT playing some reps, but not exactly sure what's going to happen there, and certainly big question mark still at the quarterback position.
Again, weather's going to play, I think, a big factor in how they look and whether they get to go on the field. Look, it's not a strong Temple team. However, you get scared, right? You really do want to wrap some of these guys around it.
Yeah, I mean, putting JT back into a situation with the slippery grass.
Yes.
I don't know that that's probably going to be the best situation.
And I mean, that's kind of what the field conditions, and maybe I'm remembering it wrong, but it feels like they were a little bit slippery at UAB last year. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I mean, you want to protect them as much as you can. So if we don't have to take the chance, let's not. But I can see him getting at least maybe, they talked about like 20 to 25 snaps. So, just him getting out there, at least being able to run around, do some, get some reps in, and then, hopefully start increasing that as we come back into the Dome against UAB the week after.
Zay Frazier is not on the depth chart. Interesting comments made from Traylor earlier this week made it sound like there's some kind of maybe compliance issue going on with Zay. He really didn't want to get into the details or to talk about it, so I'm not sure that we're going to get a whole lot of additional information as the weeks go on, but certainly sounds like there's something more serious going on with that situation.
It's bizarre, isn't it, though? I mean, because he's been with us now, was it 2 seasons?
Yeah.
So, what is it that came up this year, 5 games in? And I'm already counting the Temple game, but,
sure.
At least 5 weeks in, that all of a sudden we have to step back and say, oh, there is this issue that's occurring. So, I mean, we can speculate, but,
yeah.
The reality is just overall bizarre situation. So I don't blame Traylor for not wanting to go down that road because, it's got to be something that's with the NCAA or something going on there.
So speaking of Traylor, let's kind of talk about some of his comments recently.
Sure, let's do that. All right. One of the first things that kind of stood out was, him talking about really, in my head, out of both sides of his mouth.
Right.
At one point, he'll say, hey, we're trying to figure out who we are. And then in the next minute, he's saying, we know exactly who we are. Okay, what do you mean? Like, and I think, to me, what's difficult is the fact that a reporter doesn't ask follow-up questions, mm-hmm. or hears somebody else's interview and says, well, wait a second, like in this other interview, you said that you didn't know who you guys are, but right now you just said that you know who you are. It's one thing if you're going to say, well, you're painting them into a picture of, yes, they're 1-3 and they're not very good right now. That's one thing, but he's not really kind of elaborating on it. It's more of just a blanket, we don't know who we are, but we do know who we are.
Yeah, a lot of times these comments come out, it seems, when he's being challenged. It's almost like he'll say something like, we're still trying to figure out who we are, or we're not playing that well. And he'll make those comments in interviews when he's not being challenged. But then as soon as somebody pushes back or asks him a question that makes him go on the defensive,
yeah,
that's when he responds with, we know exactly who we are. We've got this figured out. We've got this team. Like, and you're contradicting yourself, but then you're also almost just responding in a way like you've been challenged, and so this is just your kind of go-to response or something.
And I get that fans will look at it and say, well, sometimes they're just quotes taken out of context. But that's where I think you need to go back and actually listen to the interview and take those UTSA Roadrunner glasses off and just see it for what it is. It's a guy that's frustrated.
Right.
It's a guy that's clearly has, a lot of questions surrounding the status of his program because he's coming off 2 championships. He's, hasn't really been questioned very hard or challenged very hard in the last 3 seasons. Something we were talking about away from the pod was he's had challenging moments where he's been, in our eyes, socked in the mouth. But he always answered with something else. Mm-hmm. Because, as you said before in one of the previous podcast episodes, there were the intangibles that he had. He had a healthy Frank. He had, a stable offensive coordinator, someone that looked like, knew exactly how they wanted to formulate a game plan and had the team executing at that. There was always something there. The culture was there. So when things just aren't working and everything's kind of it's like you're springing leaks everywhere, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of what it feels like this year. He can deal with 1 or 2 situations, but right now he's got 3 different situations going on at the same time.
Right.
And it's almost too much or it's overwhelming. It's like, you're looking at, okay, I've got some issues with my offensive coordinator, still trying to figure some things out. maybe he's going to need some more time to grow or take a little bit longer to develop than he anticipated. And then you couple that with Frank's injury, which he wasn't expecting.
Right.
Or he wasn't expecting it to be as long. And then you couple it with the fact that JT's injuries may be taking a little bit longer. And now we've got these three things, and I could have dealt with two of them, but I don't know how to deal with all three of them at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean, we've all been there, right? Like, we've had issues at work where we're like, okay, we stopped this, this leak over here, but there's these two other leaks over here. And, like, so we all get overwhelmed. The difference is, of course, we don't have a microphone in front of our face, and Traylor's just making things worse at times by just talking and just kind of the word vomit, right?
Yeah, I've got the receipts that he's, collecting so that at the end of the season, when things go well and they end up in the conference championship, he can, make fun of all of us who've critiqued him or whatever. Yet,
in the same manner, that same week, he'll say, as he's saying that he's collecting these receipts, he'll say, we're just not a very good team. Well, so are you collecting your own receipts? Because you're also stating the obvious to us. Look, we know you guys aren't playing well, and we're not trying to figure out every single answer. But we are going to dig a little bit to figure out what is your mindset. And
how are you going to make an adjustment?
Right. And what are some of those adjustments? To me, I'd just love to hear him just say, look, we've made some adjustments, but you'll judge us on them on Saturday. And he's kind of started saying that this week, which makes me feel better. But on the other hand, I'm just like, I just scratch my head at times because it's like, you do need to kind of take a step back for a second, take a deep breath, and just don't just blurt anything out, because it just makes things worse, and it makes the program kind of feel much more downtrodden. I mean, he feels, obviously, like I said, he's frustrated, but it just doesn't feel like there's the same spark going into Temple.
Mm-hmm. I guess the only good news is when we listen to Stan Drayton in his press conference, he also sounded like a man who'd been punched in the face.
Right, because I was going to say, speaking of which, Stan Drayton, right?
Right.
Like, this is the same guy. Now, there's two different situations here. You have, as we just talked about with Jeff Traylor, is coming off 2 championship seasons, and now he's going into new conference. Obviously expectations that he set have us thinking, winning the conference, going to the conference championship in the first season AAC. You have Stan Drayton that has been a career assistant, been a long-time running backs coach. He's very good at what he does, but now he's taking over this Temple program that hasn't been really infusing its team with talent. It's not like they've been underachieving, because they just don't really have that talent. And it's pretty evident because he had this great quote here during the media roundtable that they had for Temple on Monday, which was, it sounds like excuses, but we're very young in spots. And unlike UTSA, who went to the junior colleges, we went to high school and got our kids. So they're having to play, which that will pay off. That's the positive, that our young guys are going to play, and that will pay off in the long term. Yeah, no, look, I agree, Stan. The problem here is that, much like Jeff Traylor, you have so many holes that you're trying to plug that it's going to take time. And, it's quite obvious, I think, that, he's going through some frustrations of him believing that it's at a certain spot. Are you getting the same kind of vibes from that too?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I thought it was interesting that he took a shot with they went to the junior colleges. Well, UTSA is in a different situation than you are. We've been able to recruit under Jeff Traylor and start to develop some guys. So yeah, we're plugging some holes from the junior colleges.
For depth, right?
Right, for depth. Where you're just plugging holes in general, starters and, and depth. And really, when we get into talking more about their players, that is one of the issues that they have, is that they have some talent at their starters, but they have no depth. And in other positions, they really don't have, that level of talent at their starters either. And so, they're just trying to kind of muddle through it, but...
Well, really, he's got the empty cupboard. Right. I mean, that's what he inherited, and that's the unfortunate part. Jeff Traylor came into UTSA, and he did not have an empty cupboard.
Sure.
So... it's going to be different situations, and Stan's going to take a little bit of time, and I think he's going to get a long enough leash to say, we're not going to fire you after this season.
Right.
Though he and Traylor sound like they're going to get fired, right?
Oh yeah, they both sound like coaches that are on the verge of A, having the fan base turn against him, and B, getting fired.
So here's this quote from Temple's rivals that after that post press conference, that they put in this article about the entire press conference, and they said, look, Monday's press conference had a dull feel to it. Maybe it's a realization by Drayton that this team just isn't good enough right now to compete, and the program is a year behind where he hoped it would be. Again, injuries don't help, but even when close to full strength, the Owls have often shown they're a step behind better competition. Look, I cannot imagine that you're going to believe that you're going to be this middle of the road / top end AAC team after 1 year.
Yeah.
It's a nice fantasy, and I think every coach wants to believe that. But again, Stan's going to take a little bit more time, and I think Temple Rivals team over here just summarized it pretty well. So let's go talk about some of their players, right?
Yeah.
Let's start off with the quarterback. Who do they have at quarterback?
E.J. Warner, which is a name that you have probably heard because his father is Kurt Warner. He's a true sophomore. He's doing better this year, but I think the challenge for EJ is that they've sort of put the team on his shoulders. And that's a lot to ask for a sophomore.
Right.
One of the things about him is that he is a pocket passer. He's kind of that statue. He's the kid who's going to stand there in the pocket and take a sack rather than scramble. So when they ask him to do this, kind of take the team on his shoulders, it's a little different than what we've talked about maybe in the past with Frank, where we've said, Frank's had to put the team on his shoulders, but Frank can use his legs to kind of scramble and get extra yardage, where that's not EJ's style. So he's going to try and fit in those passes or try to do something with his arm strength, and a lot of times that unfortunately leads to turnovers.
Very much like his dad. His dad was pretty much a statue, but his dad was also just like EJ showing. And much to your point, they're staying there tough on these blitzes, and he's delivering the ball out of there, and it's great because normally young quarterbacks panic much sooner and throw the ball much sooner. The thing is, much like you said with DJ here, though, is that I think he's going to have to learn to at least escape a little bit more.
Yeah, like a roll out of the pocket or something.
Right. Owen McCown, who actually his dad has a connection to Kurt Warner that we'll talk about here in a second. Owen has that knack for just getting out of the pocket and just moving, sensing the pressure, and getting himself out of there to make sure that he doesn't get sacked or doesn't lose many yards. The last thing you want is a sack of like 9 or 10 yards. That's the Frank Harris, right? Frank's going to run around and think he can get away from the defender sometimes, and he's going to give up a bigger play. Whereas Owen's going to say, nah, I'm going to try to move towards the line of scrimmage or trying to sidestep and try to at least make it like a 2 or 3 yard loss because I need to learn, I have to fight for the next down, right? So there's differences in approaches there. I think EJ is going to have to learn how to be more like Owen, much like his dad when he was kind of working with Kurt with the Cardinals.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, fun fact, Kurt Warner and Josh McCown were on the same team, the Arizona Cardinals, in 2005. Warner was the starter. McCown was the backup, and then until Warner got injured, McCown became the starter for a while. Then Warner earned the starting position back, so they kind of went back and forth. So it'll be interesting to see if Owen plays this game, having these two former teammates see their sons go against each other on the field is kind of an interesting little tidbit. And I'm sure will be talked about quite a bit, regardless of whether Owen plays or not.
It'd be a fun reunion, right? Just two guys that were in the league together, just reminiscing back to their days. Yeah, it's got to be great. Let's talk real quick about some of the weapons that EJ has on offense. First of all, we'll talk about their running back, Joquez Smith. Look, Temple has had a lot of problems rushing the ball. Yeah. A lot of it not because of Joquez, a lot of it because their offensive line just can't hold up pass blocking. And then when it comes to run blocking, they're just not doing a very good job either. So it's really limiting what this offense can do. And it, like we said, it puts more pressure on EJ to have to make a play. I think Joquez Smith is pretty good, but just not having any sort of blocking, you're just not going to be successable.
Yeah, against good FBS teams, they've only been able to run just under 70 yards per game. Miami, it was, I don't even know if they got 20 yards per game in that game of rushing yards. If you look at their overall stats, it's going to look very different, but that's because they had the one FCS game. I think they played Norfolk State, and they had like something like 290 yards of rushing. So their average is going to look a little bit high, but when you really narrow it down and look at how they played against Akron and Rutgers, it was pretty much an air raid.
Right. And the thing is, that's tough for Drayton because he's a running backs coach, right? Like, he wants that to be his bread and butter. You know he does. So it must really pain him to have to say we have to go to air raid and not lean on the bread and butter that I want for this program. Well, you're going to go to the air raid. Like I said, there's going to be some problems with pass blocking, but you're looking at your wide receiver weapons, and you've got Ahmad Anderson Jr., senior wide receiver. Unfortunately, he's day-to-day. I think it's a lower body injury. Again, remember the sloppiness that we were talking about in terms of the weather. He has Zay Baines, a sophomore receiver, kind of tall. He's about 6'3". Looks like he's healthy. But then you also have Dante Wright, a junior wide receiver, sort of a shorter guy, again, day-to-day with injury. So top 3 wide receivers, and you already have 2 that are struggling with injury. Right. Imagine that on UTSA's end if we were sending out, Frank to have to play with Willie McCoy, and he hasn't really had much time with Willie McCoy. Or even if he has, it's going to be a tough bout for him the entire time, right? So EJ's got really kind of up against it. He really spreads it out around like all these receivers. So while we're talking about these 3 receivers, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the only ones getting receptions. They love to throw to the running backs in the flats.
Hey, the running backs got to play some part of the game. I mean, they're certainly not playing, they're not rushing the ball, so, they got to be involved in the receiving game, right?
But would you say, I think you had this comment away from the pod when you were kind of scouting. That's right. Atos was scouting a bunch of AAC competition this summer. You said that they throw out more to the flats because it's sort of a balance to their running game, correct?
Yeah, it's kind of their extension of the run game.
So this team uses, 12 personnel. However, it's going to probably be a little bit different here against UTSA because of the fact that they have so many injuries on the offensive line, so many issues with the offensive line, that even Stan Drayton has said their efficiency on first and second down is bad, which leads them to long third down conversions. What are your thoughts on third downs?
Yeah, and that's usually where they go to the tight ends. So if you get into that, or if you see them get into that situation, you're really going to want to watch and see where those tight ends are, because those are the people that EJ is going to target. And that's where he's been most successful, honestly, when making those third down conversions.
Right. And, unfortunately, they've been put in third down way too many times. Yeah. And because of it, it puts them in a position where they're having to struggle with their offense, and it sputters. Tell me if you heard that story before with UTSA in the first 4 games of the season. Let's go to the special teams. Tell us a little bit more about safety Sam Martin, who's a kick returner for Temple.
Yeah, he had a 95-yard kick return for a touchdown in the game against Tulsa. It's probably the brightest spot that they've seen all season on special teams. Other than that, their special teams has been kind of pedestrian. It almost seems like maybe they don't have a lot of faith in their kicker. He's 4 of 6 on the season. He's missed 1 from the under 40 and then 1 under 50, but his long has only been a 40-yard field goal this season. So you're likely going to see them try to go on 4th down when they're in those longer yardage situations rather than go for a field goal. I'm not sure if it's because they don't have a lot of faith in him or whether he's just, proven to be inconsistent.
Well, and the other problem is the fact that they've been behind so many times in some of these games that they probably had to go ahead and stretch for it, right? Just go for it on 4th down. They've got to make something happen. So, it's a tough situation at Temple. We're trying to find the bright spots here. We'll talk about the defense, though. Familiar name at defensive coordinator, Everett Withers, who was Texas State's head coach for a while, around the Frank Wilson years. We've seen him a few times. He's actually had a lot of struggles on defense. His key player is Tywin Francis, who's a safety. He's a senior transfer from Colorado State. He leads the team in tackles. Right away, that would pretty much tell you that's a problem that safety has so many tackles. But the fact is, they actually run sort of a version of the 3-3-5 that UTSA runs. So they usually have a safety that's pretty close to the line of scrimmage. So it kind of makes sense that one of their safeties is leading the team in tackles because they're up so close. Now, as much as I say that, there have been so many injuries. Not on their secondary, and that is their strength of the team outside of the safeties. But the injuries on the defensive line they just don't have any depth, and they lost their top defensive lineman in Alan Hay against Tulsa. He was their nose tackle, and that's a huge hit. Hence why Tulsa rushed for so many yards. I believe it was over 300 against them. I mean, you lose your nose tackle, you lose one of your big-time defensive linemen, it's going to be a rough road.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting. Again, we don't know who's going to play quarterback, and with the weather situation and Frank's health, even if he does play, not sure that he's going to be able to be as mobile. But they really seemed to struggle when they played Tulsa against a quarterback that could get out of the pocket. Tulsa's quarterback, he did a good job of, again, kind of escaping the pressure, running for a couple of yards. It was a little Frank Harris-esque in his runs, although I do think that Frank is probably a little quicker than he is when he's healthy. So, again, if Frank plays and he has the opportunity to be mobile, or if Owen plays and can be mobile enough to escape the pocket, I think we can really expose the same things that Tulsa exposed in Temple's defensive line.
Well, especially with some young guys playing, because there is going to be a freshman in Alan Hayes' spot at this point. So, again, taking advantage of inexperience there. So that's a really good point there. I think that is something that we'll probably have to think about. So the only other thing I wanted to bring up was linebacker Uvandy Rigby. He is one of their better performers. He is their middle linebacker. However, he's got a lower body injury. So once again, here we are talking about a lower body injury, sloppy game. Do they risk it? I think it's a long season. So, Drayton's going to be put in the same situation as Traylor. What do I do?
Yeah.
I do need a player out there, but is it enough to risk it for the rest of the year? It just depends on how he sees it. So let's go to the keys to victory here. On offense, it's going to be simple. I think you have to attack the soft middle. If Rigby's not playing and you definitely have Alan Hay out, that means the middle of the field is going to be soft. Now, that also means that they might bring up some of their safeties, as I kind of talked about with Tywin Francis. I just think that you're going to want to attack them with the inside zone plays that we've seen and the GY counters that we've seen that's been the bread and butter of UTSA's offense. I think this is going to be a game where our three running backs, Kavorian Barnes, Robert Henry,
Rocco Griffin,
are going to be important. I think we use all three of them. We bash away at this defensive line and this defense overall, use their inexperience against them. And I think it's going to be a better offensive output. I just don't know that it's going to be a completely fantastic one. Again, there's still problems in the UTSA offense, and I don't think they're going to get solved, especially in pretty sloppy conditions that we're anticipating for Saturday. On defense, I think they got to really watch out for these running backs in the flats. You had brought up the fact that they really do like throwing out to the running backs, and because of it, especially in sloppy conditions, a little over pursuit, you take the wrong angle, and all of a sudden, you're trying to lunge, and it's tough enough to do it when it's just dry surface.
Right.
But trying to do it in a muddy grass field of Lincoln Financial, we're talking about slipping, and we're probably looking at some big gains out of that. So something to think about. The other key, which I think you would like to go ahead and just say it.
Got to force some turnovers, for the love of God. We've been talking about the fact that UTSA hasn't been able to force those turnovers. Once again, we're playing a quarterback who is prone to throwing interceptions. Temple has been prone to several turnovers in each of the games so far this season, so hopefully this is the game that changes our trajectory and we'll get some turnovers this time.
Well, and it's a weak offensive line. They just don't have the depth, and because of it, our defensive line should be able to dominate this and really put some pressure on EJ. So, look for those keys. Let's get to our predictions. I will start first. So we've been talking about rain and how it's, going to possibly be raining during the game. Could also be confused with Stan Drayton's tears. Could also be confused with Traylor's tears, because Traylor has been shedding a lot of them through some of the frustrations we've had in the beginning of the season. Look, this Temple team is just really in severe need of an infusion of talent, and it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take some time. It's, like you said, it's a rebuilding team that Drayton has, and it's not something that they're going to be able to scheme out and be able to just overwhelm this UTSA team. for all the frustrations with the non-conference games, I really believe this UTSA team is going to come out. They really have something to prove. But again, I don't feel like all of these problems are going to be solved just miraculously because we're playing Temple. It's going to take a little bit of time, but I think we're going to see some good progress. I still think that UTSA, because of the way it's always done it, was going to play down a little bit to Temple, and they're going to probably let them hang around a little bit too long. Things are going to get a little, why are we moving the balls efficiently? What's going on? But I think ultimately, UTSA prevails. Give me UTSA 31-13, ruining Temple's homecoming.
All right, UTSA opens as a 12-point favorite. This is a game we should win. This is a game we can win, regardless of who's playing at quarterback, whether it's Frank, Eddie, or Owen. But the question's going to be, is this a game we will win? This is going to be the test of the program, where their mentality is right now. If they come in with that chip on their shoulder and they play like they have something to prove, this, I think, can be an exciting game, regardless of the rain. If we come out flat and we play down to our competition, this could be another wet and miserable game. We especially need our defense to step up and play well, regardless of who the quarterback is, so that we can be competitive. Temple's O-line has struggled, and we should be able to create havoc and put pressure on E.J. Warner. Likewise, Temple's defense hasn't played well against those stronger FBS programs. Regardless, I'm concerned that we might allow this game to be closer than it really needs to be. But I do think ultimately UTSA will prevail. Give me UTSA 24-17. All right, before we go, let's talk about some of the other American Conference games that happened this past week. Tulane beat UAB 35-23. UAB had the lead at halftime, but they let Tulane come alive in the second half and really take charge.
Well, it has the now viral, moment of Dilfer going nuts on a special teams coordinator. So, he apologized, but, this is, once again, you have emotions flying high. You can't let it show, because it to me, it shows a bad representation of your program.
Yeah, and it just tells you, again, UAB has made some strides in some areas, but they haven't put the complete package together.
Correct.
Rice beat East Carolina 24-17. JT Daniels played, but it was clear he wasn't at 100%. They did have the backup quarterback, Chase Jenkins, come in and play part of the game. He seemed competent. I know that sounds bad, but he seemed like he did well. It's clear that Rice's best bet is a healthy or healthy-ish JT Daniels. Which,
as UTSA fans, we used to have that about Frank, right? Like, as long as he's healthy-ish, we need to put him out there. I don't think that's necessarily the story for this season. Mm-hmm. But for Rice, who hasn't really had a quarterback, it shows you just how good a team can be when you have a really good quarterback.
Right. South Florida beat Navy 44-30. You can definitely see the progress that Alex Golish is making with that team.
Yeah, kind of interesting to see how much confidence your team gets after really taking a top P5 team to to the limit there.
Yeah. And then SMU beat Charlotte 34-16 in front of a crowd of about 43,000, and that included all of the Stellar Broadcast Network draw of the 18,000 viewers. So I guess it's okay that SMU's not going to get any media money, because if all they're drawing is 18,000, I don't think they really deserve any of the new ACC's money.
Yeah, rough. That's rough.
Rough.
Well, and let's be honest. They're playing Charlotte, right?
Yeah.
Charlotte's awful.
But still. They claim that there were 20-something thousand people watching, 25,000 watching in the stands, but okay, so they sold 25,000 tickets. There's probably less than 43,000 people in person and on TV watching that game, which is sad.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right, UTSA women's soccer. It was a rough week for them. They fell to North Texas 0-2. They're going to be on the road for the next 3 games. They're back in action on Thursday night at 7 p.m. in Dallas against SMU. That game will be on ESPN Plus, and will probably have more viewers than the SMU football game.
Here we go. This is going to be a running thing now, isn't it?
Why not?
Hopefully they can get some things sorted out, but SMU is a tough team, so got to find that offense. We really do. I mean, I think that they're still struggling when it comes to finding that last few passes in the last third of the field. So
equally rough weekend for UTSA volleyball, who lost back-to-back matches against Rice and Houston. They'll be back at home in the Convocation Center this weekend. There's 2 chances to see the team: Friday at 6 against South Florida and Sunday at 1 against Temple.
Rice is a really good ranked team, I believe. I think they're ranked. And, they've just had a really good team for a long time. So really wasn't expecting them to do too much, but I thought that they did well to, really push Rice as much as they could.
Yeah, especially in those second sets, they got close in each of the games.
But... yeah.
All right, well, I guess that about wraps it up for us. Thanks for joining us on the Hail Mary podcast. I'm A-Toves.
And I'm the Toves.
We'll be back soon to recap our victory over Temple.
Birds up.